She dresses in a rather deliberately exotic fashion. And she's a jazz singer. And she and Bruno, after a rather edgy first encounter and so on, start to understand one another a bit when they're in the car and they start singing. And she starts singing cheek to cheek, and then she goes off into scat, and at a certain point Bruno joins in and they start singing happily in the car. It's like a little mobile karaoke thing. And one of the things that she's really extraordinary at, and I got this a bit from my daughters, she's extraordinary at all of this social media stuff, and Instagram and Twitter, and I mean, I can barely handle Facebook, but my daughters just sort of navigate through these social media waves. And I thought, well, actually a lot of this stuff could be very useful in solving crimes.
Well, she whips out her phone instead of a gun. I mean, it's really interesting. Whenever anything comes up, she zips out her phone and finds things out.
And advances the plot.
Yeah, no, it's very handy. Now you have to sort of envision her in purple with a turban, you know, which is pretty exotic, as you say, in Bruno's village. Yeah, but you know what would maybe make it a little clearer? Could you explain again? There's the French, how the French investigate. There's the municipal police and there's the gendarme, and it's a little complicated.
It is. The French have always had two main police forces. There is the gendarmerie, which was founded in 1793 at the time of the French Revolution, and they were founded as a paramilitary counter-revolutionary army, because in 1793 it was a time of the terror, and there was a counter-revolution coming from Brittany and other parts of the West, and the French revolutionary forces in Paris decided that they needed a paramilitary force that would go in and crush these rebels, and that was the gendarmerie. And the gendarmerie has always answered to the Ministry of War in France.
How do you do? Not the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of War?
The Ministry and the Ministry of, and even the Police Nationale don't answer to the Ministry of Justice, they answer to the Ministry of the Interior. It's the magistrates who answer to the Ministry of Justice. Got nothing to do with the police.
So the gendarmerie is more like the National Guard?
It is, except they're permanent.
Okay.
And they're under military orders, and they are also the rural police, or in most of the rural areas, they're the ones who do the patrolling. Then, although there is a police nationale, they don't work in Paris. Paris has its own municipal police called the Préfecture de Police Department, but all serious cities and towns have the right to have their own municipal police. And it's a huge potential for patronage for the politicians, and it's partly also because it works. And Bruno is not that extraordinary in having this kind of relationship with so many people in his particular town. I mean, I keep trying to point this out in the books that most city cops are dealing with strangers. The victims are strangers, the criminals are strangers. Bruno is dealing most of the time with people that he knows. And that's a huge, huge difference. And we have in Britain a big debate on at the moment about bringing back more and more of the coppers on the beat. That's the policemen who walk around a particular neighborhood.
Even New York City has had that discussion.
They're bringing that back as well.
Right.
I think it works. I think it's a very good idea. Particularly now that we have this challenge once again of terrorism, because unless the police are able to establish personal contact with some of these communities where terrorism is emerging, it's very, very hard to build up the information system as needs. And I mean, one of the realities of Europe today, looking at Manchester and London and Nice last summer and Bataclan in Paris, and Berlin last Christmas is that it's become a normal part of, a tragically normal part of life and death.
I read in something that the problem isn't that there's not enough data. The problem is there aren't enough analysts.
Yeah.
That it doesn't do you any good to know that this guy should maybe be on a watch list. That nobody's analyzing that and watching him. And so, you know, that needs to be in local police with actual contact. I mean, Phoenix is not a place where a person could handily walk a beat. One thing is just too hot, but another, our neighborhoods, we're an automobile city, you know, so you could have people drive around, but you really can't have people walk around in the same sense. But what I think may be a little more confusing for your readers is the role of the magistrates, because that doesn't happen for us, you know, that you get people from the judicial side coming into the investigation so early.
Well, the most powerful man in the world, because it's the magistrate who has to decide whether there has been a serious crime, a délit as it's called in French, and then the magistrate is the one who is meant to direct the police. Once the magistrate is involved and declares a délit, he then in effect outranks even a very senior police officer in saying, I want it to go this way rather than that way. And then the magistrate will often be the one who prosecutes. The magistrate, well, the French do not have a system like we do in Britain or you do in the States of an adversarial court in which you'll have a prosecution against a defending attorney. Now in France, the truth is meant to be established by the magistrate. And when he is convinced that he's got the truth, he will go before the judge. And at that point, you can get a counter-defense attorney. But the magistrate really has extraordinary powers. And right now in France, we've had a state of emergency for the last 2 years. And I know a lot of cops who have not had a single full weekend off in those 2 years, because that's what a state of emergency means. And it's troops at all the airports, troops at big railway stations and so on. It's really serious stuff. And under current French law, state of emergency, if the magistrate agrees, you can be held without trial for up to 4 years.
Whoa. But you can see for a novelist how great this is, because you've got an automatic source of conflict. You know, I mean, you've got Bruno who, you know, wants to invest a crime, but then you've got, you know, the magistrate who can come in and direct that. And so this young woman, who's really kind of wet behind the ears, even though she has graduated from, and that's another French thing too. You might mention the école, because that's really, it's a French version of the Ivy League taken to extremes.
The French believe it is sensible to have a complete meritocracy. So there are straightforward universities, but the really important places to go to are the Grandes Écoles. And there's the School of Mines, there's the School of Engineering, where they have to wear uniforms, so they're young military officers. And then above all, there's the ENA, the École Nationale d'Administration. And that is meant to produce the French governing and administrative elite. And so, of the last few French presidents, Chirac was at ENA, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing was at ENA, Sarkozy was not, he broke the mold, François Hollande was at ENA. It is a most extraordinary place in that it combines in a way the Ivy League with Britain's Oxford and Cambridge all in one particular spot. And if you're not going on to be President of France, you will certainly be running one of the big ministries of state, or you'll be running one of the many French corporations that are in fact partly owned by the French state, like Airbus or French Gas or Electricité de France or France Télécom. It is it's a very strange way of running a country, but it seems to work. The French seem to enjoy it, and you have to admit they do keep a pretty nice country.
But it's a real, I mean, it's an old boys network, you know, a serious one. And I always think it's kind of funny that, you know, they had the revolution to get rid of the ruling class and then they created their own. But it's more of a meritocracy than it is just by blood. And in point of fact, well, it'd be hard pressed to come up from a blue collar family, perhaps in Marseille, and suddenly find yourself in ENA and whatever.
Yeah, on the whole, there are really fashionable and very successful lycées. You've got to get through your lycée, which is your secondary school,
right.
the high school. And if you go to Louis le Grand, you're much in the heart of Paris. You're much more likely to go on to ENA than if you go to a little, say, Lycée Jean Jaurès in working class Lille. That's the way it develops.
Well, we were talking to Kara Black last week, who writes the series set in Paris and the various arrondissements, whose life goal is to come here with you one of these days. We've got to work it out. We were talking about that, and I remember, I don't know how many of you have ever read the Judge D Mysteries by Robert Dan Gulick, which are among my favorite books of all time. And China, Tang Dynasty China, which is what, like 6th century or something, also had a bureaucratic meritocracy by examination in school and so forth, so that ordinary Chinese could in fact advance to become, like Judge D, a magistrate, you know, and run the country. So it isn't a brand new concept with the French.
Nothing new under the sun.
Right. So anyway, here's Bruno, and he has this woman show up who is young and inexperienced and all, but she's there to, and he resents it.
She has been told she has got to follow him around for 2 or 3 weeks and doing a time and motion study of what it is like to be a municipal policeman. And Bruno thinks, my God, this means I can't nip in to all my friends around the commune and have a little drink, as I often do. People won't tell me anything. And what's more, it's quite unusual in this part of rural France to have a sassy young black woman who dresses in turbans and other things and seems to feel it's her duty to boss the local policeman about. So but she has one great thing, which is she loves her food. When Bruno takes her to the local bistro, and she starts talking with the chef, with Ivan, about the classic dish of the Caribbean, épices, and then she goes and makes it in Ivan's place. Then she starts becoming more than one. Plus, she eats all of the croissant, pain chocolat, pain raisin that Fouquet has in his cafe. Becomes famous for that.
She does. So she becomes part of the community just by eating.
Which is very French.
That's right. And singing. So all of that is background. What actually happens? I mean, she gets there. She didn't get there to investigate a particular crime. She got there to follow Bruno around. But inevitably something is going to happen, right?
Well, all my novels start with one particular image or one particular idea, and this one began with a ruined castle, which is on the cover of the books, and it's called Comarque, and it's an extraordinary castle. It's built on a great big high cliff. It's one of the biggest castles in Europe in terms of the actual land surface it commands, and it's also right in the middle of some of the most important prehistorical archaeological sites in the area. And it's sitting on top of a whole number of caves. I've been into the caves of this place. There are 15,000-year-old horses' heads, life-size, engraved on the wall. Just across the valley is Cap Blanc, where you have a whole series of statues, about 14,000 years old, of life-size animals coming out of the cliff. There is the great Venus of Lucerne, one of the most famous bits of prehistoric sculpture. One of these Venus sculptures of very amply proportioned women with enormous breasts and hips and very prominent vulvas. And it's almost certain that there was some kind of fertility symbol. and the most famous of them, the Venus of Lucerne, was found right there where the castle is. So I've always been fascinated by the castle, and I know the chap who owns it and has made it his life's work to try and restore it. And I'd always wanted to write something about it. A woman's body is found dead at the bottom of the great high cliff, and she's not carrying any identification. And Bruno has to try and find out who she is, did she fall, was she pushed, what's behind all this. And it turns out that Amélie, with her magic phone skills, turns out to be very, very good at researching these matters. And the great thing about this is that this castle is that it leads me in two directions that I can use to counter one another within the plot. One direction is the prehistory. These Venus statuettes, what lies within these caves that have yet to be explored under the castle. And the other is the direction of the castle itself and what happened to it, because the castle was founded around about 800 by a man called Comarque, who was given the land by Charlemagne for his brave deeds in fighting the Viking braves. And it's his descendants who then built up the chateau until Gérard Comarque went off with the first crusade into the Holy Land against the Moors. And the guy that I know is also called Comarque. He's the direct descendant of all these people, and he's the current count. But this guy, Gérard, when he went off the Crusades, he entrusted the castle to the Templars. And there's an old, long legend that the Templars' treasure was buried right there. So, I mean, I've got the Middle East, the Templars on one side, I've got prehistoric peoples on the other. I'm just happy as Larry, happy as and two of my great interests in history are coming together there. So
No, it's wonderful. I have spent a lot of time there. Rob and I traded houses with an author who lives very near where Martin's writing about for 5 weeks a few years ago. So we got to see all of spring unfold while living there and visiting Sala la Canada and the prehistory museum. And I'm amazed that they will ever let you back into the museum after the terrible things you do to it. But I have to read the book to find that out. But this is also where the caves at Lascaux are. And some years ago, there's a very nice author named Aaron Elkins, an anthropologist, who said a book there. And at that time, the wisdom was that the Neanderthal and the Cro-Magnon did not have sex. So, there was no Neanderthal blood in all of us. Since then, that's been disproved, and we all have some Neanderthal blood.
Well,
but
all of us, if we're not from Africa.
Right, okay. But there's a famous museum there where, and the reason that this area, one of the reasons this area is so heavily filled with anthropology and fossils and all the rest of it, it's not that different than Mesa Verde and our country up here. If you were to go to Mesa Verde, you would see structures inside the cliffs and the whole bit, not dissimilar to these. It's limestone, and so, there are these huge overhanging, both caves and actually just
Overhang caves,
right.
like this sort of.
And people have still lived in them. Some of them still live in these, or maybe they did. Maybe they've been moved on.
Well, until the 70s, they were still living there. In fact, I know one place where back in the 90s, I came across one old chap who was living there. But they are, most of what we know about prehistory comes from this single valley of the Vézère. It's got, according to the UNESCO World Heritage Site, they count 153 caves that have various kinds of decor and art and engravings, and 25 painted caves in which you actually have paintings inside. It is, plus the only really significant burial site for Neanderthals is also found there. That's La Ferracie. And it's really fascinating because for years we assumed that it was rather like Darwin, Charles Darwin's survival of the fittest. We assumed that the Neanderthals had been wiped out by the coming of the Cro-Magnons, the rather more modern, our ancestors, Homo sapiens sapiens, which was always a really, really grim thought, because it implied that our human existence begins with an act of genocide against the Neanderthal, which of course fits in with the biblical tale of Cain and Abel. And it's interesting that you have exactly the same myth of brother killing brother in the dawn of history in the Muslim religion and also in the Buddhist religion. And there's this idea of internecine war, and among the Hindus as well. But thanks to DNA, we now know that most of us from Asia and Europe have about 4% DNA in our makeup.
So they were absorbed rather than obliterated.
Intermarriage or interbreeding certainly took place. Now, whether it was consensual, I don't know.
It's like Roman the Sabine women, but there we go. And one of the things also, of course, that is a huge problem in this area now that tourism has found it and all, is, and it's the same problem we have down at our little cave here down by Tucson. Can you let people in? And we'll just, they're breathing and, can't keep people from touching things using their flashes, and I'll destroy the paintings. So at Lascaux, they closed the cave and they made a complete replica of it, hilariously. And I don't know if you've been there, but in is it in Germany or is it in Venice? I can't remember which. There is a whole, in a museum, there's a whole reproduction of Lascaux, and the best view you can have of the ceiling at Lascaux is to lie on the floor with a mirror at whatever this is in either Germany or Venice, and there it all is.
And there's one, it's in Germany, it's near the Neanderthal near Dusseldorf. But we've now got yet a further one called Lascaux 4.
Right, you talk about it, that's what I was leading up to.
It was just opened in December.
Oh, it's now open.
It was opened in December by one of the last acts of President Francois Hollande.
Okay.
I was invited along to the opening of it. And it's meant to be Lascaux for the 21st century. So there were 4 Lascaux now. There's the original Lascaux #1, which has been sealed off from the world since like 1960. There's the second Lascaux 2 is the first great copy that was then put together, which I really recommend that anybody see. Lascaux 3 is the travelling Lascaux exhibition, which is, it takes about 40 great big trucks to carry it. But it goes, and I go along on these voyages with it, just do the English speaking. It's done USA, Canada, Japan, Switzerland, Germany, Korea, and it's about 1/3 of Lascaux is there, plus a very nice museum exhibit. And the 4th one, at a cost of close to $100 million, is called Lascaux the 21st Century, Lascaux 4. It's a much bigger copy of most of the cave, plus it's got terrific computerized stuff, including virtual reality to get down to some of the very lowest levels. And I warned them when I was first shown, I said, look, you're going to have lots of little boys having lots of fun here, but being violently ill as they go around with this virtual reality. Well, you can imagine. I don't know if you've tried virtual reality yourselves, but you get very, very dizzy. And I was a little boy myself once, and
you can still remember.
I can remember it very well.
Well, if you go there are other caves you can go to, and and I did one with the Northwestern alumni trip, and there's one where you actually ride a little train like Disney.
Ruffiniac.
Yeah, Ruffiniac. Yes, it is Ruffiniac, right. And you get all the way to the back, but it's pitch dark and all. But here's the thing. It was the same way for them. So how did they do this art on the walls when you were so far underground, there was no illumination of any kind,
I can answer.
Oh, good.
They, whether it was by trial and error or whatever, we know what they used for illumination.
Okay.
And they picked on just the right thing. They picked on a combination of wick and of grease that would not come up with black smoke, and therefore
Ruin the painting.
ruin the painting and cover the chalk. And also it wouldn't smoke, and it burned with a very clear flame. And what they used was they made little stone lamps, stone bowls, in which they put reindeer fat, rendered reindeer fat, and the wick was a juniper twig. And that was about the only combination that would have worked without this, until beeswax came along, without getting all of this black smoke. So they were pretty smart.
Well, this is all important in the plan, and actually, so is the museum. There's a really phenomenal museum of prehistoric man located in,
Les Aisies.
Les Aisies, right. If you ever go there, you really wanted to go. Not only did they have displays, but they have interactive stuff and all. I mean, it's really fabulous. Martin, as I say, is probably banned for life from this museum, but,
Oh, no.
no? They were okay with it?
They seemed rather pleased. I said, well, I'm going to have this particular drama taking, oh, great. I will just sit there. And also there's a scene that takes place in a restaurant, which is actually inside one of the cliffs of Logerie Basse, where, again, one of these Venus statuettes was found, along with various other really important finds. It's on the Great Rock, which runs about 5 kilometers. It's a huge, great limestone cliff, about 200 feet high, with lots of ledges in it where people lived and carved and painted and so on. And about half a dozen really important sites for archaeology are found there. And beside one of them is the Logerie Basse restaurant, which I go to not infrequently. And it's a classic French, traditional French country bistro. It's not fancy, but for 13 euros, which is, I guess, about $15, you will get a 4-course lunch with wine. You will get soup, pâté, main course, dessert, and wine, and it's pretty good stuff. When I say main course, it'll be chicken, or it'll be steak,
Or it'll be duck.
Or it'll be duck.
Come on,
yeah.
seriously, this is
This is
very
duck
serious
country.
duck area. It's also, there's a very famous Riz de Noix, which is walnuts. So walnuts are a major part. Walnut wood is beautifully used and shown in the market in Sarlat. But
And wine.
yeah, that's what I was getting the wine. But
Walnut wine.
oh, walnut wine.
I
Oh,
make
sorry,
it
I
myself.
remember the walnut oil, but walnut wine,
Oh,
seriously?
no, I make it myself.
course you do.
Before the 20th of July every year, you pick your about 40 green walnuts. You add 8 litres of red wine, 1 litre of really rough, the real stuff, eau de vie, the moonshine alcohol, if you like. The French add a whole kilo of sugar. I add half a kilo. Stir it all up, cover it, dark corner for about 2 months, then strain it and bottle it. Oh, it's great. It tastes a bit like a Madeira, but I've still got some from 2002, 2006, 2011. It's wonderful. And it's so simple to make. But the point I wanted to add about this restaurant in the cliff at Logerie Basse is that at the back of the restaurant itself is built into the cave, and through the back of the cave is another cave where, for special occasions, the restaurant will open it up for things like for friends who want to have a dinner party or a birthday party or something. But in this rear cave, they found the skeleton of a Neanderthal man who was buried seated, which is something very unusual in this part of France, but it's quite common here in southwestern America. And so the skeleton's long been removed to the museum in Les Aisies. But what it means is that every time, when you're sitting there inside the cave eating, every time the waiter comes in, after he's handed stuff down, he quickly crosses himself.
Not terribly far away to the west is Bordeaux, and between as I see in the Perigord and Bordeaux, there's some wine towns. Well, one of them goes on and on and on about the war between the English and the French, really terrible. And I think of Martin, is this kind of anomaly in there because this district, has hated the English for forever. And yet Martin has become almost the personification of the Perigord food, partly I think because of your cookbook. So why don't you update us on your cookbook?
Well, I think it helps that I'm Scottish.
Okay.
Yes, I mean, but look, the French are they're very welcoming. So I'm a chevalier of foie gras, which is I'm one of this sort of group of people who's meant to uphold the quality of foie gras.
That means you get to a really
and every year I get to go to this extraordinary lunch it's a day when we spend the morning testing the foie gras and tasting them and so on. Then lunch starts at about 12:30 and goes on till about 6. And I have to arrange for somebody to pick me up to drive me home. And then they've made me a Grand Consul of the wine of Bergerac. Now the Grand Consulate was founded in 1254, and there are 20 of us every year. We wear these medieval robes, and we have the right to go into any vineyard in the whole of the Bergerac and taste and test anything to uphold the quality of the wine. Look, this is a really tough job. Somebody has to do it.
And it's interesting wine too, because the terroir there is very flinty and stony, and the wines tend to reflect that, don't they?
Well, one of the things about French wine, both the Burgundy and the Bordeaux, is that the rivers that nourish these wine areas both stem from the Massif Central, which is the old part of France. And so a lot of the minerality of the French wines comes from that from the silt that's being washed down over the generations. But it's also the distinct feature of Bordeaux and Bergerac wines is that we were originally under the sea. And so there's a huge amount of limestone that's made of millennia of dead sea creatures, and that's the white chalk that you get. And we're extremely lucky in the Bordeaux and the Bergerac for the fact that we are well watered. We have this very distinctive soil and terroir, and that the tradition of wine there goes back at least 2,000 years. I mean, we still have a wine called Chateau Ausone, which is named after Ausonius, who was a Roman poet, who was the first to praise the quality of the wine that was produced in this particular area. I am just delighted to be involved in it all, and so last year we produced the first Cuvée Bruno. Yeah, we made about 5,000 bottles, and they've all gone. And I've been looking into trying to see if I can get them exported to the States, because we're going to be making some more. But you're supposed to be believing in free trade in this country. Every single state in America has got its own rules about exporting of foreign wine. It's going to.
Yeah, I told you we ran afoul with that with the rosé from Cape Town that Rob fell in love with, and getting it here in Arizona is really difficult. But my question was, since your cookbook, ostensibly French food, that is published only in German apparently, it's really a European story. How are we doing
by an Englishman?
Well,
yes, a Scot. A Scot. Very important distinction. Let's not forget.
It's it's a heartbreaking story.
Yes.
Because the way one of my American editors, publishers said, he said, Martin, beautiful book, great photographs, we know it's won prizes and so on, but the only way we can sell cookbooks in the USA is if you've got at least one, preferably two, of 3 qualifications. So one is to have a world-famous restaurant. Second is to have a successful cookery TV show. The third is to have a figure like Nigella Lawson. And you don't qualify any one. My British publishers wanted to do it, but the German publishers own the copyright to the photographs, and there's a big argument about how much they pay. So I said to my German publishers, okay, I'll publish it myself if I can have the rights to the photographs. And they said, well, that's fine, Martin, but how would you distribute it? And I said, why, through Amazon.
We'll talk about that later. I do have a solution, actually. So I'll put you in touch with Jason Goodwin, who has worked this out. But anyway, it's heartbreaking. So you can go to the website, which is maintained by your daughter, right? One of your daughters? Right, and sort of figure out what's going on. But meanwhile, back to the book. So what we have is we have a dead body of a totally unidentified woman below the castle on top of ongoing archaeology, and maybe there's Templar treasure underneath it. That's all we need to tell you, right? And then you already know about the young woman who's come to town and what's going on there. So let's ask about Balzac and about the horse, and then we'll take questions.
Okay, well,
Balzac,
the Basset Hound, was modelled on my own Basset Hound, called Benson, who I'm afraid went to the great happy hunting grounds in the sky on Good Friday. Well, he was 14 years old, which is very old for a Basset Hound. And when I get back to France, I have an appointment with a breeder called Basset puppy, because I can't do without a Basset. I don't have a Hector, which is the name of Bruno's horse, but I do have a nearby stables where I do go out, but rather more sedately than Bruno does. I'm getting a bit nervous about falls these days, so...
You're not galloping thus over the ridge?
A gentle canter is about the best I could manage, in more ways than one, yes.
And so the women in his life are still, involved with the animals. But before Balzac, there was another.
There was Gigi. Yeah.
Gigi.
Yeah.
And I still like, I asked Martin once how he could have borne, to lose Gigi, and I always liked your answer, which I'm not sure we ever really discussed, but in terms of the book. Yeah.
Well, Gigi was, I realized Gigi was 10 years old, because Bruno had been there for 10 years, and I thought, and I know that the average life of a Basset Hound is about 11 years, and I thought, oh God, I'm going to be facing the prospect of writing an incredibly sad, moving, or maybe not successfully, scene of the end of this dog. And I remember, probably many of you will have read that great scene in Charles Dickens in The Death of Little Nell. And you'll recall that Oscar Wilde once said, "Any man must have a heart of stone who does not laugh at reading the death of Little Nell." Very Oscar Wilde kind of comment that. But I thought, well, A, I'm not sure I can do such a tragic deathbed scene justice. And secondly, it would break my heart to write it. So I thought, well, if he's not going to die in Bruno's arms, perhaps he has to fall on the field of honor, defending his master, which is indeed what happens.
No, I thought
it's really
you
rough
reasoned that out very, very well. I mean, it was heartbreaking when Gigi was so brave. But at the same time, I think in the context of the series, it makes perfectly good sense. But horses live longer, so with any luck, Hector will go on.
I know it's all made up, but I mean, in these fictional stories, you have some real choices to make as a writer.
You really do. Right. Now, I've been encouraging Martin to tell us more about the mayor. Because I love the mayor, and he kind of quieted down there a little bit, but he comes back with more force.
Well, I mean, I had fun writing the mayor's, well, it wasn't fun, but when the mayor, when his wife passes on, and then the mayor very quickly finds himself this new love interest, exactly. No, the mayor is, well, it's interesting because in my time in my village in France, I've known 3 mayors, and each one of them is convinced he's the model.
How are you dealing with aging Bruno? Is
he never ages. No,
that's
Bruno,
what I thought.
No,
Yes,
Bruno
he's just still 40 and,
Bruno is forever 40, yes.
Right, and he shouldn't age. That would be...
Well, no, there's this little sort of, I think there's this little bubble around Saint Denis.
Like Brigadoon, except
of immortality. The world around it all ages, but not any of our friends. So
excellent. I'm really happy to hear that. So, anyhow, perhaps some of you have questions relating to the book, and then, as I say, we can turn off the live stream and can ask other sorts of questions. Miles, are you back there in your office? Hello, Miles. Not there. Well, she'll appear at some point. Somebody will, Patrick King, you could turn off the live stream, couldn't you? How wonderful. Anyway, do you guys have questions about the book in particular that you might like to ask? Oh, come on.
well,
Just a general comment, not as to follow the narrative, but many of us do enjoy the cooking parts, having had a chance to go there and vicinity, so encourage you to indulge those.
well, funnily enough, the one that's going to be coming out next year, which I've just finished,
Yay!
begins with a cookery school.
Oh.
And Bruno is called in to be one of the advisors on how to get 5 meals from a duck. and in fact, it's very easy to get 5 meals from a duck because you have the legs, you have the magret, the breast, you have the foie gras, you have the aiguillette, which is these sweet bits of meat down at the very base of the stomach, and then above all, you have the carcass, and the bones that are the basis of soup and stock and everything else. And, not difficult at all to get 5 meals from a duck. In fact, my wife Julia, one summer was so struck by the number of ducks we were consuming with my family and friends coming through that she kept a log of how many ducks we'd actually. We got through 42 ducks. I mean, I was surprised we didn't have webbed feet. I was.
Why don't you put a couple of recipes in those books and sort of stick them in that way for those of us reading dishes?
Well, I sort of try and describe quite lovingly the way each of these dishes is made, and what I'm now thinking about doing is a cooking with Bruno, just bringing out a book which simply has not just the recipes for every single meal in the Bruno novel. So not just the main course, but the starter and the serious and everything, plus the foie gras, the vin de noir, and just sort of doing it that way. Which
Wow. Could you bring in some of your young ladies, Guadalupe and...
I would certainly bring in all of the other stuff, yes, and all of the meals that are in there. I mean, I think that would be quite fun to do.
It would be fun and delicious too. Don't you wish you could go to dinner with Bruno and his people?
Does Emily bring any stuff with her from the islands?
Sorry?
She brings any stuff with her from the islands?
Well, no, she brings the recipe for her mother's épices from the islands.
But does she bring any ceremonies or any island culture with her?
No, she's a very Europeanized young woman. But what she does is she brings her mother's recipe for certain kinds of this kind of special spice from the islands, and she finds the Scotch bonnet peppers, which are the heart of it, in the market in Saint Denis. And it's. No, I mean, I've tried this épice, and it's very, very good. I mean, this emerged from a couple I met. He's French, she is from Guadeloupe, and we became friends with them, and so I start eating some of their food. I really am not. I am not nationalist when it comes to food. I mean, I do enjoy a hamburger, and I think that good American barbecued ribs is a feast fit for a king. But even the Germans have got their Wiener Schnitzel and their Bratwurst. There's not a culture in the world that doesn't have some good food.
And they still, despite the EU, have markets in this area. It's the butchers that I guess in Germany anyway, the butchers have been clobbered by the EU health regulations and stuff. But in France, they're still doing the cheese. And Rob and I went to all kinds of markets. Rob would live in markets and he had the opportunity. So, and there's nearby, somewhere near we were, there's a famous strawberry market. I can't remember the. Right, so one day we went up and, and there were like strawberries of all kinds, the little teeny ones, the Frais de Bois.
In the Périgord, it's the only place in the world where we have appellation contrôlée for strawberries. Because about half of the Périgord has got this déclaration d'origine for strawberries, which is unique in Europe. We grow 22 different kinds of strawberries. And they are for
the market.
Yeah, and they are for different things. So you have the Marais des Bois, which are these lovely little sweet woodlandy ones. And you have the ones that are best for jam, and other ones that are best for making jelly, and other ones that are best for eating with cream, and other ones that are best for going into tarts and pies. Oh,
and you also need to pay attention because the markets, which date, from medieval or earlier times, are licensed for particular days. So there's a market in this town for Thursday and a different one for Wednesday. So if you pay attention, you know where to go on any day of the week to which town and, what the market. Charlotte, if I remember, has a big one on Saturday and a partial one on, I think, Wednesday, something like that. There's a smaller one, I think, on Wednesday.
There's going to be an enormous party in the town nearest to where I live, the Butte, because in 2 years' time, in 2019, will be the 700th anniversary by King Philippe le Bel.
Okay.
So 1319, and we're already planning what to do. There's going to be an enormous feast, because nothing could ever take place in France without a big communal meal.
You'll be there in your robes.
I will be
pretending to be French, but you're just a Scot in France. All right, anybody else have a question?
Sure.
Well, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what just happened in England with your election, because it doesn't work like ours, and I'm still slightly confused about how she's still in office.
So am I. She's clinging on by her fingertips, really too weak to hang on, but too proud to let